Welcome back. You are now doing less with John and Jeff. Here we are to say that we have finally capitulated, and now we believe that the Fed is finally doing a good job. So
only the Fed can save us.
only the Fed, only the Fed can save us. Thank goodness we have a central planning bank that is able to bring us back from the depths of a pandemic, recession, depression that we're gonna see. So.
And before you call us hypocrites, only God can judge us, so we don't care.
Yep. So we're going to be talking all about why the Fed has nailed their policy, got it exactly right. They were off by a little bit before, but this recent cut all the way to zero, another emergency rate cut last Sunday. We're recording this Thursday, March 19th. So a couple days ago, they cut to zero, and the market itself could not have done a better move with the with the interest rates.
Yeah, I mean, before we didn't think the Fed had any business existing, but let me tell you, these new policy changes, they just completely changed my mind. Really thought out of the box on these ones.
We must eat our words because actually, before we thought that the Fed was acting purely in the interest of saving the stock market from going down, but now we see that's not why they're acting, because if it is, they're completely ineffective. So that must not be the case, and good for them for having morals, sticking to their guns.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought printing money was the solution all along?
All right, that was fun. Now let's go back to bashing the Fed. So I said it. The Fed cut rates to zero. We saw it coming, and it happened. And I will say, I was joking about it, but I was a little bit surprised to see that the stock market didn't react at all, because in the past, talk of that or that action saved the stock market in the 2008 great financial crisis. That movement, along with quantitative easing, allowed the stock market to start going up, which lasted for 10 years. But this time, the stock market, on the news of an emergency rate cut, has continued to go down. We're now more than 30% off the February high in the stock market. So whatever the Fed's plan was, I don't think it's going according to their plan.
Yeah, I just think investors, they just don't think the Fed has any power over this cocktail of stuff going on, because it seems like whatever they do, it just doesn't matter. So it's like, basically, it's kind of like there's a war going on, and the Fed's like, oh, look at these cool drawings I made. Does this help? And everyone's like, no, Fed, that doesn't help.
Yeah. So that emergency rate cut was only one. There's been about one or two announcements every day this week so far. Announcements including setting up funding for corporate commercial paper, setting up funding for treasury purchases, all sorts of programs they're rolling out. Very into the weeds, very technical stuff. You have to basically have a finance degree to be able to understand some of this really wonky stuff. They're really wonky markets they're going to be participating in. The major one is they will be accepting equities as collateral from businesses. So that basically means if Tesla's stock goes down, it's going to have to file for bankruptcy, the Fed can accept some of that stock, pay what I assume would be the market rate, so really effectively buying a stock. They could buy any equity, and that is basically unprecedented. It would be unprecedented, except Japan tried it 20 years ago and ended up buying like 60% of all the stocks in their whole stock market. And
I think 80% of
80%,
Japan's
yeah.
stock market is held by their central bank.
So that, and they went on to multi-decade long stagnation in their economy. It's
Yeah,
actually they're really in trouble. So I think we might
right.
be
And
lucky to have the same fate as them, though.
yeah, like you really can't underplay how much of a dangerous thing this is that the Fed is now kind of venturing into, because the Fed has no profit motive, right? Like they can just create money out of thin air. There's nothing in, like they have no incentive to earn a profit. That's not what they're there to do. And so if some company, say Boeing, for example, is drowning, and even Boeing is sort of like asking for a bailout. So instead of the traditional bailout, which comes from like our treasury, let's say they sell their stock, or they take a loan from the Fed and give their stock to the Fed as collateral, and they go bankrupt anyway. Well, that means the Fed becomes the owner of that stock, aka the shareholders of Boeing. So now you have I know the Fed is technically a private entity, but it's not though. It's an arm of the government. It's not, you can't compare the Fed to Google. They're not the same thing. It's basically just another arm of the government. And so, you know, if they are the shareholders of a company and have no profit motive whatsoever, they have no incentive to do a good job. So you essentially, what you've done is essentially nationalized an industry under someone who has no intention of doing a good job at running the business. Or maybe not, maybe they do have an intention, but they don't have incentives to do a good job. And as we know, people require incentives to do stuff. So this is like, I think, pretty scary stuff they're starting to get into.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that worst case scenario where they absorb stock from a company that's going bankrupt or that goes bankrupt, um, the Fed can then just say like, "Hey, we gave you money, you gave us stock, you got to repay that somehow," and that company will just say, "No, we're bankrupt, and
Mm-hmm.
we can't pay you back. You just keep the shares that you have of our stock," and then the Fed will just be like, "Oh." They're just stuck
Right.
with
And
shares so they basically paid the market value for shares that they know how to keep indefinitely that are now worthless.
right. And they, like, you could argue that, oh, they can just sell those back onto the market, but that's what they said they do with the first five QEs. And so, at this point, do we believe a word out of their mouths? So I don't know.
Yeah, that's brings. There's a point that was reading about. That's like, let's say tomorrow a vaccine is created for the coronavirus, right? That existential economic threat just goes away as soon as it came. Now, what do you think the Fed's going to be doing about all these emergency measures it took? Is this just going to roll it back? No, they're going to start saying things like, "Oh, well, we gotta wait to see all of the stuff that all the bad stuff that happened. We have to wait to see that become fixed because when that's fixed, then we'll roll it back." Well, that's what they've been saying since 2008. They
Right.
absorbed all this emergency, like all they committed to buying all these emergency treasury purchases back beginning in like 2009 2010 with quantitative easing, and ever since then they well after that happened they said, "Oh, well, now the economy's healthier, we'll start rolling off some treasuries from the balance sheet." Well, then shit hit the fan, and they just went right back to it. Right now, their balance sheet is
Right.
bigger than it's ever been as of today. Actually, they announced the latest the latest number that they publicized about their balance sheet. It's now it's over 4.6 trillion, with the previous high in 2015 after all the rounds of quantitative easing. I think 2.5 or sorry 4.5 trillion was the max. Now it's over 4.6. So it's like all this stuff, these emergency measures are just temporary rollouts of like Jeff said, nationalization of of parts of our economy that used to be free markets. They're now being distorted and perverted by permanent permanent market actions of a government entity with no profit
Right.
motive.
And I just like we've gotten into like a lot of the details of what the Fed's doing, but like I think at the end of the day, just the important thing to keep in mind is there's just one core principle at play here, and that's central planning is always less effective than decentralized, aka market planning. And the reason for this, as we said before, is but I think it's just important to drive this home. Is the Fed is just a group of people. I don't know the exact number of people on the board, but it's not very many. What do you know how many it is?
The FOMC,
Yeah.
it's 19.
Yeah, so you got 19 people trying to figure out the price of something. And when you think about what the price of anything is, like what goes into that, right? Is like, let's just take something simple like bread, right? So all the info that goes into the price of bread is like, okay, how much did the land cost that you grew the wheat on? How much did the capital equipment cost that you you bought to farm the wheat? How much was the water? How much was the fertilizer? You know, how much is the transportation? It just there's so many pieces of information that each individual along the way that it took to make that bread has very good understanding of and is doing their best to make a profit at each step of the way. And so essentially what prices do is they encapsulate all the information along the way for each step of the process to get to the final result. So like prices have this magic thing of just essentially conveying all of the information in a marketplace in one number. And then now if you try to set that number yourself, you basically have to say, I can do better than all the information and decision-making power of all the individuals spread out in the market. Which, I don't know, you have to be pretty freaking arrogant to think you can do better than a million other individuals.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and the Fed has the least amount. So every one of those individuals is likely to come upon a fairly accurate number because they have skin in the game. It's their livelihood, right?
Right.
Like you need to be able to turn a profit if you're delivering fertilizer to a to a farmer that's yielding crops, right? You need to be able to say to yourself, I'm only going to do this if I can feed myself afterwards. I'm not going to do this for free.
Right.
I'm not going to do. So I'm researching my line of work. I'm researching my resources and transportation, all those costs that I'm going to be up to date. I need to be. I have real incentive. The Federal Reserve has like probably the least incentive to get it right of any economic agent because they literally don't have a constraint. They can turn.
Yeah, and their salaries are not tied to any
Yeah.
sort of performance metrics. So it's like
And they're big
completely
salaries.
have no
They
incentive.
get paid more than
Yeah.
I think the Fed chair gets paid. I think they get paid more than the president. I may be wrong, but they're very high to do this cushy economics work.
Yeah.
I have read some of what Ben Bernanke, who was a Fed chairman, he was the Fed chairman during the Great Financial Crisis, of 2008, and he wrote a book about that time dealing with the crisis. And he was like talking about how he had to like stay up all night and like have calls at early in the morning, and like he had to cancel his vacation to to like deal with some of the
Man, what a rough life.
yeah, right.
No business owners have ever had to do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going. I was just like, imagine having a business that you started with your bare hands and you had to work all weekend. That's probably like a normal weekend for like
Right.
many business owners. And this is like this economic PhD talking about like, this is hard work. Taking calls at 4 a.m. He's like, I had to sleep in my office one night. It's like, I don't know. It's goofy.
Yeah, that feels very out of touch.
Yeah. I don't know if Powell, who's currently dealing with the same stuff, if he'll publicize a book in the future talking about the same thing, how hard this period is for him. Because I mean, in my opinion, just like, all right, don't do it.
Yeah,
Don't do it.
like,
See what
oh,
happens.
wow, really hard. All right. Yeah, go home.
Go home. This is too. This You're right. This is much too hard for an individual to take on. You gotta go take it.
It's almost like this is an impossible job.
Yeah. So I mean, just to quickly address what you said, like, should there be a Federal Reserve? Obviously, some people think there should. Obviously, most people think there should be.
Hmm.
I think that one would help. To be completely honest, I think having a Federal Reserve can cause efficiency in the system theoretically. But when you look at the incentives, the personal incentives of the people, obviously you have to. We're not at an age where you can put an artificial intelligence into the role of a central government. Maybe if you could, central bank. If you could do that, maybe that would be a really good application for artificial intelligence. Unless they decide to wipe out all of humanity, in which case it would be easy. Geez, now that I'm saying that, what if Powell is a artificially intelligent robot who has been designed to wipe out humanity? Oh, geez. He's doing a good job. But so obviously, so if you could take out human subjectivity, a central bank could help in a period like this, where it's like this exogenous risk, this that nobody saw coming, this pandemic, the coronavirus. If you were able to like stimulate the economy like once you deal with the virus and once you're like trying to work your way out of like a deep economic hardship, like having some economic stimulus is actually very helpful. It would help you get to recover much faster than you otherwise would be able to. The problem is,
I don't agree with that though. Just because, like, stimulus, in my opinion, is like you have to back it with some kind of value, right? Like, if you're just creating money, you're just picking winners and losers. Anytime you create money, that's just a wealth transfer. And so it may boost the numbers, but all you've done is transferred wealth. And so to me, you need a better justification for transferring wealth than just the greater good. I don't know.
well, I think that in after an economic hardship,
Yeah.
people with capital are less likely to lend to those without capital, but that have good ideas. In
I agree,
like
but
economic uncertainty.
like that's just psychology. Like, they got burned and they don't want to get burned again. Who are we to step in and say, "Oh, you're being irrational"? No, don't withhold your money. You're being silly. Like, lend it out. Like, it just seems again arrogant to say to that person who got burned, who is their own is their own capital, is their own money, to say you're being stingy now. Like, lend it out. Like that. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, because it's not really a positive incentive; it's a negative incentive. It's like we're gonna take
Right.
away your incentive to save.
Right.
So start lending out, or else you're gonna have
Right. Like, shouldn't they just be able to decide uninhibited what they do with their wealth? Because in a free society, any wealth, I mean, you can steal wealth theoretically in a free society by scamming people. But in my opinion, scams don't last long and will not be like. I don't think you can become like a billionaire by scamming. How rich was Madoff?
Yeah, he had, I think, 60 billion under management.
Okay. Well, yeah, okay. It's possible. So I don't want to rule out how rich you can get by scamming people. But my point is, I think what goes around comes around eventually. And, these sorts of scams don't work in perpetuity. Like, people are a lot more aware of Ponzi schemes now after getting burned by Madoff. So it's kind of like yeah, one like this guy was able to like get really rich off of it, but like it's not going to continuously keep enriching people. And so at the end of the day, the best way to build wealth is by providing people with things they want but don't know how to get.
Now, what about, so sometimes there's economic events that are exacerbated by compounding fear, which isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily like like people don't have perfect information in the economy. So if there's like a run on a bank, that doesn't mean that the bank shouldn't be able to lend. Like that bank would theoretically in a free market
Right,
have
but
to.
like I mean, either the bank holds more cash themselves, right? Or they could like you could have like a private Federal Reserve, right? And what the private Federal Reserve is, it's just like a water tower, right? And it just literally sits on cash or gold or whatever your money system is. And it just sits on it. It doesn't do anything. And you just pay them to sit on that money like a little insurance policy. And if one day one of these run on the banks happens, then they dish out all their cash for you in the short term, and then they you can like give it back free of charge or something like that. My point is, I see no reason liquidity crisis cannot be solved by a marketplace. Like saving for a rainy day doesn't involve predicting the weather.
Yeah.
It's about preparing for the unknown. And people who don't do that get punished.
Yeah. That's fair. And if you wanted to take that argument further, you could say that like an economy might be anti-fragile, where every time you get burned, the people learn from that, and the next
Right.
time they're more ready for that kind of event. And you could argue that hasn't been, that phenomenon has not been able to be witnessed, because every time
Exactly.
something would allow the fragileness of the economy to become tested, the Federal Reserve has been so quick to swoop in and just patch over, to band-aid over any kind of short-term pain that could result.
Like you basically see our entire economy has learned nothing from 2008. Like this crisis has been predicted by every single person that saw 2008 coming. They all saw this coming, and they're all profiting.
They all say that it's like the same thing. It's like the same thing we saw in 2008. It's the same thing now. It's like massive debt.
Right. It's the same problems that no one learned from, and it's just like if you just listen to like any of the people, even the guy in The Big Short that the movie was about, he saw this. He saw this one coming. There's like a million others, not a million, but there's plenty of people who saw 2008 coming a long way away, when the general consensus has been, oh, nobody could have seen it coming. And yet here these people are saying this is going to happen again, but worse, because we haven't learned anything. And the reason we haven't learned anything is because the Fed has basically stepped in and said, there's no need to, you didn't do anything wrong. There's no reason to learn from this. We got you.
Right. So I will just finish where I was going before I respond to that, because where I was going with that, with my original kind of
like the Fed you could have a reason for it. What you're saying?
I could entertain being convinced why there should be a Fed, except for where I was going was there's so much human disincentive to act optimally, like the ability for a Fed to create a opportune environment for stocks or for corporations to do well is it's going to cause a conflict of interest in, like, say, an election year, or if there's a politician you want, or if there's any reason that a human might want a good short-term economic environment where you're gonna see that happen when you have that much control over that economic environment. So it's just the very nature of putting a person in charge. You're gonna have instances where, well, I better act to keep the economy in a good place for the next 6 months, because otherwise they'll get fired. And
right.
Obviously every human's gonna try to prevent getting fired. But my response to you're saying how people in the Fed just say no one could see this coming, right?
Right.
I would say that's probably one of the major thesis, probably the reason I wanted to start this podcast with you, is to address this point. The people in the Fed say things like that. No one could have seen this coming. There are famous people, there are multiple famous people with millions, maybe billions of assets under management. So influential, popular people. They're not just these conspiracy theorists. They're not just,
Right.
lurking around the corner. Hey, man, do you hear it? I have a theory. You got to listen to me. These are mainstream people that come out and say, this is not right. This is not
Right.
good economics. This is not good economic policy. For the entirety of the Fed to come out and say no one could have seen this coming, that is you have to look at that and say that is a direct bastardization of free thought, of free policy, of that is indoctrination, right? You have to at least acknowledge that that point exists. Oh, people say that this problem occurs because there's a debt bubble caused by artificially low rates. So when we lower rates again, we're exasperating that. Like, you have to be able to say what the other side is thinking. Otherwise, you're just proving that you're just indoctrinated.
Another thing is this is I think good advice for anything. If someone's trying to sell you something and they will not say any trade-offs at all, they will not admit any trade-offs, any negatives, any downsides, any potential risks, and they just make it seem like whatever they're selling you is just nothing but roses. I think most people's natural instinct is to second guess that person because it comes off as disingenuous, because we know in real life everything has trade-offs, everything has costs, and it doesn't mean that something's not worth buying, but it's important to understand the trade-offs and understand the risks to know if you want to buy it. And so what the Fed is selling is their policy, but they never acknowledge the trade-offs or the downsides or who they might be hurting, not in a significant way. They do sort of do it, but they're very dismissive about it. They go, yeah, that might be hurting savers, but they just brush past these points. And so the fact that they really won't, it's just they're pretending that what they're doing is just, it's the greater good. And there is no dissent. This is the way to go. And they have it all figured out. And it's that to me is snake oil. It's sleazy. You can tell there's something wrong with it by the fact that it's you're not even telling us what the trade-offs are here. Maybe if the trade-offs are hey, this is going to punish savers. This is going to be a wealth transfer from people who are, paid in dollars, holding dollars, to people who are in debt and holding assets and non-dollar denominated, et cetera, et cetera. But we feel that this is, in light of those trade-offs, this is still the way to go. I would be much more inclined to hear what they have to say if that's how they spoke to us in a realistic, treated us like adults kind of manner. But I don't know. It really is kind of infuriating how much how cryptic they are, and just how they act they just know what's best for all of us.
Yeah, it makes me think of this commercial I watched one time. I was watching it with someone else. It was a exercise machine. It was I don't know what, I forget what kind of...
A Peloton bike?
Yeah, no. It was some kind of elliptical. But the commercial said, with this machine, with this great technology, you will be able to work out fewer times a week with less intensity and for a shorter duration, and you will get better results. And it's I was watching it with someone, and they're like, wow, that looks really cool. That's something I should try. And I'm looking at them, I'm you don't have to know about nutritional science or health science to know, to be an expert on how to lose weight or how to get fit, right? So let's pretend I didn't even know that. I didn't know anything about that. I'm watching this commercial. I would say that's weird, because anytime I've exercised, or anytime I've seen someone exercise, there's got to be a trade-off. You got to either, if you're working less hard, you got to do it more frequently, or if you're working
Right.
less frequently, then you got to do it more intensity or for a
Right.
longer duration. Like there's some trade-off that's not just like a magic, a magic solution where, oh, with this product you get all. There's no such thing as a trade-off. All of that you want is with this machine, and I'm like, you got to just question that. Like that's just fake marketing. That's just like, it's just
Right.
they're trying to sweeten their product with just like this artificially good sounding workout regimen.
Right. And like I don't know, I think a lot of this just goes back to like there's just this fundamental law of nature, of physics, that's really at the heart of a lot of things in life, which is that it's the conservation of energy, right? Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's only moved from one form to another. And so this idea that you can just expend less energy in every way and then just get the results you want anyway, it just clearly is not going to work. Like they're obviously bullshitting you if they're just saying, oh yeah, all those people who are working super hard and doing all this stuff, yeah, you don't need to do any of that. Because if that was true, then everyone would be ripped.
Right.
And that product, whatever it is, it would be in every single gym, every home. Like everyone would have one if it was that like legit,
Right. So I think it's just, I think the Fed has kind of taken upon themselves to when they come out and tell us like, oh, these are just necessary, or the necessary actions that we have to take, or this is just some financial plumbing that we have to take care of, and don't really think about it too much. Let's leave that to us. It's like we can just go along and say, oh wow, they're pretty smart, they know about this, but if you just understanding that a difference of opinion exists by some very credible, popular people, just knowing that, you have to say like they're not discussing any of the trade-offs of their actions. Like they never say the trade-offs.
They won't even acknowledge.
They won't even
people.
acknowledge that they exist. So it's like, and so we just have to know. Like if we know that, then we're like that alone makes us a more educated populace, and we're not able to. We won't be caught lying down with our eyes shut when they do these sorts of things. Try to pull the wool over our eyes. We're able to say, "Hey, no, stop that. We're gonna elect someone who's not gonna elect a goofball like you. That's gonna treat us like dummies."
Right. And just like, I don't know, like at the end of the day, the Fed doesn't really produce anything anyone wants. So it's like, why do we expect them to be able to make our lives better? It's like, they're not creating anything I want. They're just creating money without backing it by anything. So it's like, I think I've said this before, but it's like, everyone, I think, thinks way too much through the frame of money. It's like money is the thing I want. Just if you just take one step back and think, hold on, actually no, it's not money that I want. It's the things that money can buy me that I want. It's like you don't want $1 million. You want what $1 million can buy you, which is a nice house and a car, right? So like just step back and think for a moment. What are the things you actually want? You want a nice house, you want a car. Okay, how do you get those things? Okay, well, you can either build them yourself, which unless you're a genius or some, I don't know, kind of savant, you can't make those things on your own. So instead, you have to convince someone else to make them for you. And how do you do that? I don't know. You do something you're good at, and then you trade that with other people. And then money just makes that easier. Money's like the oil in your engine. It doesn't make your engine go. It's just, it allows it to operate without friction. Like if we had to trade all our skills directly between one another, it would be so hard to do. So money just makes that easier. So like I think people need to stop thinking through this lens of money. It's like, especially this, and I think this comes into play with like the helicopter money they're starting to talk about, where it's like we're going to give everyone $1,000. Again, do you want $1,000 or do you want what $1,000 can buy you? Because the reality is, if we print enough money to give everyone $1,000 without backing it by anything you actually want, there's not more stuff out there for you. You're still only going to be able to get the same amount you were before. It's just you're going to have $1,000 more, and the price of everything is going to go up relative to that. So it's just going to adjust, and you're not going to get what you want anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. Showing up to if you're trying to fix a broke down car at the side of the road, if you show up with a 55-gallon drum of oil, say, "Don't worry, I have the tool. We have many tools to solve this."
We have many tools. Dude, that's my favorite thing the Fed says is like, oh, we're looking into these new financial tools. Oh, we got all these tools.
Yeah.
So many more tools. It's like, no. All you do is create money.
Yeah. We have so many tools. We're gonna create money and put it into this market. We're gonna create money and put it in this market. We're gonna put money into equities. Gonna put money in, just like.
Dude, I'm just picturing Pal with a tool belt, and it's all just fucking stacks of cash.
Yeah. Seriously, we have many tools to look at. It's like, but yeah. So that's the hot topic now, in the government, is how to address this pandemic, and what they've arrived at. Almost certainly is going to be sending everybody money, like Jeff said, which is referred to as helicopter money, in the sense that you could basically fly a helicopter over a city and drop the money out of the helicopter, and everyone's going to be better off because everyone's going to, all the people on Main Street are going to scoop up the money and spend it in the economy.
And I think it's useful to think of like limiting cases. Like this is something people do a lot in like math, is you look at like equations at their limits to like understand like their behavior at extremes. And this is just like a helpful tool in a lot of ways to think about problems. And so just think about the limiting case of giving people money, right? If we just gave everyone like billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, you know what I mean? Just no limit to the amount of money we give people, right? So if we gave everyone $1 billion, do you think everyone is going to suddenly be a billionaire? Do you think we're all just going to suddenly have everything we want just because we put $1 billion in everyone's bank account? No, because that amount of stuff just doesn't exist. There's not enough stuff out there for us to all live like Jeff Bezos, right?
Yeah, that reminds me of a good tweet I read from Eric Voorhees. He said, basically this helicopter money could be described another way. Everybody take a $1 bill out of your pocket and add 3 zeros to it. And now everyone has more money. It's like, yeah, that's just illustrating your point further. It's just the absurdity of, oh, now you have more money. It's like, right. Yes, that's correct.
Like
what can you do with that?
In the short run, it can actually somewhat like improve your lot in the short run, but you'll pay for it like later on in the long run. Mm-hmm. Like, because at the end of the day, like, it's better to think about wealth than it is to think about money. It's better to think about value than money. And at the end of the day, the amount of value or wealth in the economy, how does that go up if we hand everyone paper? I mean, I know it's not paper anymore. It's just going to be digital. But if it's bits on a computer or it's pieces of paper, how does our total value, our total wealth increase? It clearly does not.
Yeah. And I think so. And so you're talking about limiting cases in the function. Well, let's pretend that the Fed computers or the Treasury computers arrived upon this number through insane accuracy, and let's just play this game for a second, where they know what will stimulate the economy, what actually will create the most, even what we always talk about, standard of living. Let's say this number is the optimal standard of living increase.
And it happens to be an even multiple of 1,000.
Yeah, right. Right. They find this number and they actually give them a lot of credit. They solve for this really hard to find number. Okay. So this is giving them the most credit they could possibly have, as any entity would be able to have. All right. Mm-hmm. So let's say that this happens. Wow. Great job. Well, even with that benefit, which I have to admit, that would be a very significant benefit, because our economy is going to be hurting very bad after this. Mm-hmm. Everything's shut down. It's going to be really hard to come back from. Okay, so let's give them a lot of benefit. It helps a lot. I don't even think that theoretical amount of help that they give the economy will be worth the new corruption and the corruption that becomes entered into the political sphere. When people talk about regimes that fail because of corruption, like say Venezuela or Argentina, or they like to point to those governments and say, oh, like the real problem was the corruption within that government. They just mishandled the power that they were given. Well, how would you like? It's almost like it's not even their fault, because how would you like a politician like Trump or like Biden, whoever's in power to say, now we can print money and give it to people. I will print $5,000 per person, or they won't say that. Like, I will give $5,000 to each person that allows me to stay in power after my term expires, right? It's just like you just introduced a massive corrupting force that now you can just buy off voters. You can say, look how much success we're having. I'll give everyone $1,000 to vote for me. I'll give everyone then it just becomes this race to promise the most. Who can promise the most in the election campaign, in your election, while you're campaigning, or once you're in office, you can just say, oh, I want this, and I'll give everybody money if you allow me to get that. So that, to me, it's a worse force than any amount of economic benefit we could receive.
Right. And it's just, at the end of the day, like we said, like, if printing money or creating bits, and there's actually other ways they can do it, right? So the government can actually take out loans to give people money. So it doesn't just have to be printed. But how do we pay our loans? It's with taxes. So it's, at the end of the day, someone's paying for it. It's like whatever money we spend, it gets paid for. It's not, and so the way it gets paid just depends on your execution. But at the end of the day, what matters is how many dollars is the government spending or printing. That's the total burden. Like, that's the calculation that you need to do to figure out the total burden this entity has on all of us, right? Because if they're just taxing, then everyone's familiar with how you pay for this. They take it out of your paycheck. Okay. So if they're paying for it with taxes, right, then it's coming from people who pay more in taxes than the people who pay less in taxes. So it's a wealth transfer. And so, we can argue about the merits of wealth transfer in a different thing. But at the end of the day, all of these things is wealth transfers. Okay. Like, for example, the most idiotic case that I don't imagine anyone would even pose is, okay, we're going to pay for the $1,000 a month, or $1,000 for everyone, by taking out $1,000 from all of their bank accounts, and then we'll give it back to them. Like, no one's dumb enough to propose that. But that would be the easiest way to pay for it, right? Like, that would be the simplest way to do it. And it's like, you can see just in that case how idiotic like something like this would be. Okay. And then now you could get cute with it, right? You could say, okay, no, everyone will pay a percentage of their income necessary to meet the $1,000 per person. Well, okay. In effect, all that's done is a wealth transfer from rich to poor. And so some people like that, but I don't know. That's like a different conversation. And another way you could do it is you could print it. And essentially what's happening there is the more cash you're holding, the more you're paying for it, because you're essentially long dollars, and now the supply of dollars goes up and the value of your dollars has been diluted. And so anyone who's got more dollars is hurt more than anyone has less dollars. And that's not even necessarily rich to poor. You could be rich and have essentially no dollars, right, if everything's loans and assets and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's an even worse way to do it. And then the final way to do it is debt, which is just taxes later on. So it's pretty much the same as the first example, except it's more expensive.
So I really like that example, or that illustration, because there's a lot of rhetoric that's really scaring me today, what I'm reading on Twitter and what I'm hearing that's being talked about on the news. And the question is, how do you pay for it is irrelevant, right? And it may seem that way. I see
this all the time.
It seems that way because it hasn't been relevant for recent memory, really the last, 30 years. Or
at least not in the ways people measure it.
Right. So when you're talking about like CPI, oh, it doesn't matter. You can just print money, and it doesn't.
Right.
The negative effects that we thought would happen haven't happened, or haven't happened yet. And so it's an irrelevant question. Why would you even ask that? It's become, this. So
What I would say is just any like government or Fed intervention at the end of the day, like I was saying, is a wealth transfer. And just because it doesn't manifest itself in the measured ways like CPI, like a lot of people go, oh, the problem with printing money is it'll cause inflation, right? And what they really mean by that is it will make the CPI go up. That's really what they're saying when they say that. And then when it doesn't make the CPI go up, they go, oh, I guess it was no problem. There was nothing wrong with printing that money because the CPI didn't go up. It's like, no. Like we said, the CPI is irrelevant. As long as they're creating dollars from nothing, they're transferring wealth away from people who have dollars to people who don't have dollars. And so it doesn't matter what the CPI reports. That wealth transfer is happening, and it's been happening. So we focus so much on these measurements that we've essentially let the Fed get away with this massive wealth transfer, but the effects haven't been reported. But I think a simple way you can look at this is look at what sort of like an average Joe with just a high school degree was able to achieve in the 50s, right? They could go on with just a high school degree to, earn a living that could, pay their mortgage for a house, have their wife work from home. She didn't have to work if she didn't want to, and support his kids. They could do all that with just, an average thing. But what's happening now is, it's they're having to also support all this intervention too. Not just their family, but they have to pay all these taxes that the government's spending, all this debt, all this money creation that the Fed's doing is all a transfer away from how the average person lives their life, which is they trade their time for dollars, right? So that's like a net long position on dollars. So that person's getting hosed while all the people who take out lots of debt and all these things and gamble with it and do like risky stuff, which is like a lot of these, corporations and financiers and all these other people, we can see this. These are all the people getting rich these days. And it's not the doctors that are doing well. It's not the other, it's all the other people who are doing this, essentially short dollar type of behavior. And it's all the people who are doing the long dollar behavior that aren't doing as well.
I wanna rephrase this succinctly because the way you said it to me earlier, basically what you said to me earlier, just explaining this concept was really well put. So I just kind of want to summarize what you just said with the succinct statement, which is a middle to low class earner used to be able to provide for him and his family. Now he has to provide for him and his family and all the shareholders and bondholders, so he's not able to do it as well. That's it. I think that's
right.
So that was you. That was well put. And so again, to just reiterate about the CPI as not going up, so there's no negative consequences. To put it another way, to kind of do a thought experiment to think about the actual negative effects. If you're holding dollars, right? Or let's put it this way: if there's a demand for dollars, which the printed money is going to those people that are demanding dollars, right? And there's a net zero CPI inflation, net zero CPI increase, right? You say, oh, there's no effect to that, but there isn't no effect.
Right.
The effect is in a unobstructed market, the holders of dollars would be able to supply that demand of dollars,
right,
but be able to receive a lot more.
Right, exactly. They would get a higher rate for their lending those dollars, so they would be enriched.
So that when people say there's no effect, that's just wrong, because that just goes to show you that demand that existed would have been met by the existing dollars for a higher exchange than what ultimately happened with the printed money going to meet that demand, and there being no useful exchange to the dollar holders. They just had to keep living their
Exactly.
life with, meager
Exactly.
inflation.
And so, yeah, like they might not be losing their purchasing power, but that doesn't mean they're not losing their potential wealth, which would have
They would have
been
had
earned
absent the
as
Fed.
like a supplier of savings,
Right.
a supplier of value creation, which they're doing. And I think the average person is getting absolutely crushed, honestly. Like if you look at how much intervention the Fed has done in the past 40 years, the average person has got completely screwed in favor of, you know, equity holders like stockholders and bondholders and, you know, these other people. And to no fault of either of them. It's just the Fed picking winners and losers. And I think more people just need to wake up to
Yeah.
this. Because it's like we're looking at all the wrong places right now.
Right. Yeah. So that argument that there's no effect of all this money printing is, it's actually not true. And if the political expediency of making that argument is the same to me as someone whose parent, if they're a toddler and their parent left a bunch of marshmallows on the table, and then said, "Don't touch these marshmallows," and then left for work, and that little toddler was able to go and eat a marshmallow, and their parent came back and they didn't notice there were so many marshmallows on the table, and that toddler could think, "Wow, eating marshmallows doesn't actually matter." Right? So the next time
Right.
they eat 2 or 3 marshmallows, and the parent comes back and maybe thinks something's up but doesn't say anything. And that toddler is like even more confident. Wow, eating marshmallows doesn't matter. So the next time they go
Right.
and eat the whole table, and then the parent comes back and
They forget the marshmallows, they eat the whole table.
they get really confident. Their parent comes back and
He goes, "Holy shit, where's my coffee
"Where's my
table?"
table?" So yeah, obviously the toddler at that point in time would not be in a good situation. The parent would probably punish them.
Right.
So it's just making that argument. Oh, nothing's happened, therefore nothing. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's almost so far that I actually agree with the people that say, "Oh, asking that question is pointless. Asking a candidate for the presidency, oh, how are you going to pay for it? Where are you going to get the money? It's pointless because, in my opinion, yeah, it is pointless because they all do the same thing. They're all going to print the money anyway. It's almost not even worth
Right.
asking them because it's like, are they?
Well, really, they're going to borrow it, but it's
Yeah,
going
they're
to
going to
be
borrow from the Fed, who's going to
enabled by the money creation.
Yeah, it's pointless to ask them because they're going to lie. They're going to say, "Oh, it's going to pay for itself in this way," and also we're going to raise
Oh, yeah, that's
taxes,
the
which will
biggest
pay
one.
for it. And they make up all these, and then they get into the presidency, and they all do the same thing. They all just spend at a deficit. They all just create these
Yeah.
deficits. Deficits don't matter. They say, "Well, hopefully we've made you think about that in a different way. That the deficits do matter.
Right.
They have mattered, and they will potentially matter more."
Yeah, I would say they've certainly already have mattered. So it's not just that it's like, oh, we haven't seen the effects of it. We just haven't seen the effects in the way most people are measuring it. Okay? And then because it's difficult to measure wealth transfer. That's actually something that's hard to measure, and it's not even something that a lot of people think about. But I think it's gonna start appearing in measurable ways too, with how irresponsible they're being. Because if you look at the bond market, there's a decent chance it might have peaked, and it looks like perhaps bond yields are going to start reversing. They're going to start going up from here on out instead of down. And believe me, if you didn't think debts and deficits mattered before, you're going to start to when interest rates start getting 5, 10, 15, 20%. You're gonna feel it then.
Right. None of us listening to this podcast in recent memory, maybe if you're over, I guess if you're over 50, I think in the 70s is
Yeah.
when the yields started to go on a straight path downward, and ever since then. So if you are,
Yeah.
and if you were 50, you were a toddler when they peaked. So people listening to this over 50 might say, "Oh, I remember when yields were going up before the 70s." But everyone else listening to this, everyone under 50, has no recollection, can't remember. As long as you've been on this earth, there's never been a period of treasury rates for a significant period of time moving up.
Right. It's only ever
Rates.
been like short-term increases.
It's been, if you look at the chart, it's just been a massive 50-year long path downward. And
Yeah, it's almost been like a straight line down
Right.
for the past 50 years. And we basically hit zero, like almost hit zero, recently.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're a person that understands that you're not going to lend someone money in exchange for less money back later on, then you understand by the time it hits zero, it only has one place left to go, which is back up.
Right. It actually did happen this week. There was the 3-month bill, U.S. Treasury bill, was negative like
Really, was
negative
it?
like 3 basis points for like a couple seconds this week.
That's
I
crazy.
think a couple times it happened. So yeah, that was
Imagine being that guy
yeah. Just stuck with that
who
bag.
who sold at that price.
Yeah.
Or bought at that price,
Bought at
I guess
that
you could
price,
say.
So I mean, the big debate is if something does happen, if something big happens, it's going to be one of two things. It's going to be massively deflationary or massively inflationary. And I think it could be deflationary. A lot of people are calling it and saying it could be deflationary just because there's such a demand for dollars and just because there's so much, you know, a lot of the same forces at play in the Great Depression people are calling for now, which obviously was Great Depression was very deflationary.
Right.
But I think that deep down, I think that the Fed will respond differently than they would have than they did in the Great
Well,
Depression.
they already have.
Pledged that they
Yeah.
will. They already have.
Like in the Great Depression, they didn't
do anything. Yeah.
expand the money supply. They actually contracted it.
Right. So if they promise to do the opposite of what happened in the Great Depression, I think it will be massively inflationary. And as we've been talking about this whole podcast, just creating money, creating inflation is not is not the savior. The Fed thinks that once they get inflation, everything will be all right, but they have it wrong. Inflation will be the pain of the next next recession or depression.
And so, if you're a person that's, I call it long dollars, meaning you're like, if dollar value goes up, it benefits you. If it goes down, it hurts you. This is a policy that should piss you off. And if you earn a salary, you're long dollars, right? Because essentially what you've done is you've sold your time for dollars, right? So that salary that is written in your contract, that's written in dollars. It's not written in gold. It's not written in Bitcoin or whatever. You're long dollars if you work for a salary. So you're not renegotiating your salary every time the Fed changes interest rates, every time the Fed prints money. So your salary is really not reflecting, every dilution to the supply of dollars, happening. And so, like, this type of policy is a direct wealth transfer out of your pocket. So the more people which is a lot of people that work for a salary, that can just wake up to the fact that literally wealth is being stolen from you, the better. And the sooner we can put a stop to this crap.
I guess to end on a positive, the worse it gets, and believe me, I think it can get pretty bad. I don't think we've even seen. We've obviously seen very bad so far, but I don't think we've seen true fear in the markets.
Nah.
People that I talk to, people that I see on Twitter, the polls that I've seen and I've taken personally, people are just shrugging this off. Like, obviously, a market crash that we've seen 30% down. It's very painful to a lot of people, because it puts their retirement on hold, lowers their net wealth. So it's obviously very painful, and no one likes it. No one's happy about losing that much money in their 401k.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody's like panicking. No one's fearfully.
No.
It's all just like, when am I going to put my next money in? What else am I going to buy? I don't think we've actually seen a secular change of the bull market that people say can happen.
I haven't seen anyone who's like said anything other than like, I don't know when to buy, but I will start buying again. Like there's no, oh, I'm done with stocks. Like I haven't seen any of that yet.
So back to passive. I think that as bad as this will get, I think it's a necessary change. So if we can hunker down and we're able to get through it, I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think the worse it gets, the better chance there will be for a rebuilding, a reintroduction of true price discovery into our markets, and to see an actual free market would be so great for the country and great for the people. So,
well, I agree that would be great. I am less optimistic. I don't think any of our institutions, any of our like public figures really have any understanding of how this all works together. Like I just don't think they're doing the right. If you look at Democrats and Republicans, it is a bipartisan issue to hand everyone $1,000. There is no dissent here. There's no one who thinks this is foolish. Like everyone agrees this is a good idea. So I don't think there's much hope for us to like. I mean, maybe if it, like you said, it gets bad enough, we could turn the clock back and go towards more freedom. But I don't know. I'm worried there's a storm brewing in the other direction, which is if it gets bad enough, the people who want radical change in the other direction, more centralization, more government control, I think when they're desperate, they're gonna turn to their champion and say, "Save us," So I don't see that rugged individualism where it's like we'll pull ourselves out. We'll take care of ourselves. We don't need you.
Yeah, it's true. It's truly a battle for information, I think. So if we're able to position ourselves and we're able to help our listeners position themselves, and I guess any subscriber to Austrian style economics and libertarian thought are able to, if all those people are able to position themselves in a way that they'll be able to profit from a major secular change, then at that point the people with the more power will be able to have more say, hopefully, and be able to create a favorable. Maybe. So it's really a battle for who will be able to be in the best position to make the decisions after the shakeup, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. I just wish our government would do less,
Yeah.
Well, that would be a good name for a podcast.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, thanks for joining us, guys.
All right. See you next time. Keep doing less.